From the CyberHub bunker and studio, you're tuning in to the CyberHub Podcast. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Good morning, security gang. Welcome to another episode of the CyberHub Podcast. It's great to be with all of y'all this morning, Monday, December 23rd, 2024, counting down until this year, which is an epic holiday day, right? Tomorrow, Christmas Eve, then Wednesday, Christmas Day, which Christmas Day is also the first day of Hanukkah. So for my people, we're super excited. Typically, Hanukkah falls out in the middle of nowhere in December. We don't really get a day off. It's a really busy day. You're working, you're planning for Hanukkah, and you're lighting up the candles. And this year, we kind of get to take it easy and go into the first night of Hanukkah and then 8 crazy nights thereafter, which culminate on the 8th candle on New Year's Day, which yours truly, the Azar clan, always hosts the fanciest of feast for the full menorah and the 8th candles, and this year is no small feat either. So really excited about that. Welcome to this morning's show. I hope you're ready, tuned in. We've got a lot to talk about. Go check out our brand new website, cyberhubpodcast.com. We've actually transformed our Substack into our website, so everything you want is there. And so you can go check out all of our podcasts, all of our writings. Everything is all now in one spot at cyberhubpodcast.com. jameshazard.substack.com. That's no longer a thing. So just so y'all know. Now join me for a coffee cup cheers this morning before we get into this NSO lawsuit. Coffee cup cheers, y'all. So if you were under a rock on Friday, you know that on this show, we've been tracking this NSO WhatsApp lawsuit. We've been tracking this whole spyware story for quite some time for a multitude of reasons, right? One, it's really interesting, right? It's a bridge gap between normal people and cyber people in a way, because a lot of people are concerned about spyware, and as such, they should. However, there is a line where going after a spyware with this precedent-setting ruling from a Northern California judge finding NSO Group liable for their role in infecting the devices belonging to 1,400 WhatsApp users who were victims of the spyware. Now, the spyware wasn't operated by NSO. NSO didn't do it for personal gain. NSO sells that technology to governments. Said governments then use said technology in order to address threats to their homeland, to their leadership, to their rule in any sort of way they deem to be necessary based on what they deem to be necessary. And before a whole bunch of people here in the comment section start to go, well, it's Saudi Arabia. Well, yeah, I get it. But they're a ruling government. We can on one end say, if you're a democracy and we like you, that's okay. But if not, because by the way, in the US, right, the Patriot Act was pretty much gave full legitimacy to Pegasus. And then if you want to hear worse of that, the Salt Typhoon breached a federal wiretap system in violation of a 1994 law passed by Congress to the FCC to ensure telecom security. So I don't want any of the, kind of sugarcoating of this ruling about justice. This isn't justice. And by the way, I don't think this ruling is going to stand going to the Supreme Court. And I believe NSO will take this to the Supreme Court. And I believe the Supreme Court will hear this case and will overturn it. Now, mind you, this is a civil case, but I think there's a greater interest here from a lot of different bodies on this specific ruling getting overturned. Now, no court before has ever found this liable, and obviously the filing was in a North California federal judge, which is predominantly kind of anti-business. It's known to be anti-business. Now, again, take that any way you want. I'm not saying that what NSO does is right or what WhatsApp here is doing is right. Either Meta-owned WhatsApp, whatever you want to name it. There's a whole bunch of there's a downside to each one of these. There's not a good option here. You do need spyware because in most cases, spyware saves life. And government that responsibly uses spyware does save lives. They're able to get into phones of alleged terrorists or criminal organization and stop something bad from happening before it actually happens. On the other end, you have some governments which abuse that power. But then again, they have their own way of rule. And this idea that everyone can live in a democracy or a republic like we do, or some of our allies do, is a fallacy. In some parts of the world, particularly in this case, this is kind of the Khalid Khalouji, Tariq Khalouji, the Washington Post reporter who apparently Pegasus was used on his phone. He went into the Saudi embassy, and obviously he came out in pieces, allegedly, right, in Turkey, in Istanbul, right? So of all of those things that have happened, right, around this case, there's good and there's bad, and you've got to weigh the two. I compare this to gun control. This ruling essentially says that the gun company is responsible for the murder, even though they didn't actually do it. Now, there's some evidence that actually NSO did have an active hand in loading the gun, meaning preparing the malware and helping even some governments deploy the malware on specific phone numbers. If that's the case, then there's a level of accountability that goes with that, but that level of accountability can't come from a third-party court, meaning it can't come from a country where the crime didn't occur. So again, this is, I think, part of what NSO will likely argue is, the state of California here in the Meta lawsuit alleges 1,400 victims, but none of them are really in California. None of the crimes occurred in California. And so the federal court in California in its entirety doesn't have jurisdiction over this case. This lawsuit should be brought up by the spyware victims in their countries of origin, and Meta should do the same in those countries of origin, which will likely be a case that might get thrown out in appeal. The Northern California federal judge Phyllis Hamilton determined that NSO violated the Federal Computer Fraud and Abuse Act and the California's Comprehensive Computer Data Access and Fraud Act for enabling the hacks. The judge also found the group liable for breach of contract for violating WhatsApp's terms of services. So NSO did not originally reply to this, although in Israeli media, I did watch one of their founders actually talk about this, saying this is going to go to appeal. NSO will be appealing this all the way up, and as far as they could possibly go. And while this is a setback, it's, there's still a whole lot more. And by the way, I don't want to say I agree with him, but I agree with him. I think NSO will eventually win this on appeal, and we'll be talking about this for years to come on the show, right? So there's that. So arguments for damages will begin in March. According to court docket, we'll see what happens there. There's that story, and I see a lot of your comments, and I'm glad this is a passionate topic. It should be, and I don't have to agree with you, and you don't have to agree with me to state the obvious here for a lot of people there. We'll get into some significant vulnerabilities. One here coming from CISA, that's the BeyondTrust remote access. BeyondTrust command injection bug that's impacting their privileged remote access and remote support. That's CVE 2024-12356 with a CVSS score of 9.8. So talked about this late last week on the show. Now CISA is disclosing the vulnerability, saying it's being exploited in the wild, and they're giving federal agencies, I believe, until December 27th. That's quick to patch their systems up. And it's been added to the COV list. And by the way, that's a really short time. Typically, they give 30 to 45 days. Here, they essentially gave people a week. It just lets you know how crazy this vulnerability is and how dangerous it is for organizations. Sophos, for their end, if you're a Sophos customer, you want to pay close attention and make sure you go ahead and patched your Sophos firewalls, as they could allow remote unauthenticated threat actors to perform SQL injection, remote code execution, and gain privileged SSH access to devices. The vulnerabilities affect firewall versions 21.0 GA or 21.0.0 and older. The company has already released hotfix. 3 different CVEs were assigned for this. The SQL injection vulnerability is CVE 2024-12727. The SSH login, the non-random SSH login passphrase for the HA cluster initialization is CVE 2024-12728, and CVE 2024-12729 is where an authenticated user can exploit a code injection vulnerability in the user portal. Again, that's a high sophistication attack, while the first 2 are pre-authentication, meaning as long as you're able to get in there before the pre-auth, you can get it done. You want to make sure you get those patched up as well. Krispy Kreme suffering from the ransomware attack on November 29th. now have a group, the Play Ransomware Group, that's claiming responsibility for the attack on the donut chain that pissed off a whole lot of Krispy Kreme fans. The suspicion was confirmed when Krispy Kreme was added to their Tor-based leak site. They claimed the theft of trove of data, including IDs, business documents, personal information, payroll, financial, and accounting information. They say that the stolen data will become publicly available unless a ransom is paid by December 21st. That was, 2 days ago on Saturday. As far as I know, that data has now become public. And we get to Atos. So we talked about this, I think 3 or 4 months ago. Atos, a very big kind of managed security service vendor in France, really with national security implication for the French government, is going through a financial restructuring, trying to keep the company that's heavily in debt, almost 5 billion euros in debt, to try to stay afloat. The company for itself has now been able to reduce the gross debt by 2.1 billion euros to 2.9 billion euros. They also were able to raise 1.6 billion euros in new money debt and 145 million euros in equity through rights issued and an additional reserve capital increase. Atos paid off 800 million euros in the interim financing from the new debt money. So they're trying to stay afloat here. And the reason we bring this up is because this is huge in France. And you know, I've been following this story closely because it kind of goes into what we're seeing, the consolidation in the cybersecurity market, the companies that are really having to stretch and scratch. And I know a lot of them, right? Like just last week and getting into the weekend, I was speaking to several folks on Friday, because typically Friday I do kind of my catch-up calls, kind of catch up with friends and folks from industry. And I heard about 3 or 4 different companies on Friday that were, due up to financing and never were able to secure it for a multitude of reasons. And that's rare. 2-3 years ago, that was not the case, but now it is. And that goes to the financial stability of companies you decide to work with. And I'm always at the forefront of trying to help startups and innovators get into the marketplace. And so for me, this was specifically important to share because the financial health of a company is really important. And Atos, for all, speaking to a friend of mine who is in Europe, said, like, you don't understand. This is huge. The French government was thinking of nationalizing the company. They floated that idea, although that idea was, obviously turned down. One, because the French government doesn't have the money for it. Let's start off. They don't have the money for it. That's a big one there as well. If again, cyberhubpodcast.com, that's our brand new website. You can see all of our writings there. You can listen and watch these podcasts there as well. You can also read and get a written version of this podcast with an actual actionable list, to-do list for your teams to follow through, that you can easily share from our website at cyberhubpodcast.com. We move to something very interesting happening in China. Rarely does China ever admit a sort of cyber attack on its infrastructure or companies. However, just in the last week, the Chinese CERT has accused the US government of launching cyber attacks against 2 Chinese tech companies in a bid to steal trade secrets. Oh, when the wolf screams wolf behind me, and you know that he's an actual wolf. In a notice on Wednesday of last week, the National Computer Network Emergency Response Technical Team Coordination Center of China, see that very long name? When you're a communist, you got to give it that many names, said a suspected U.S. intelligence agency, they don't want to say who, was behind the attacks, but that they handled them. According to Google Translation, they handled the attack. I love this. The U.S. government has long accused China of cyber espionage. Now China's trying to return the favor, although when you don't give a whole lot of detail and then your laws don't allow you to do that, you kind of lose credibility within the cybersecurity community. Just saying that to my friends in China. I know y'all tune into this podcast through your VPNs, because there's no way there's thousands of people that listen to my podcast in Vietnam. Just not a thing. No, it's not. I know, I've been in Vietnam. Not a thing. So with that being said, in other attacks dated to May of last year against large-scale high-tech enterprises in China, smart energy and digital information industry, according to CNCERT, the center's analysis determined the attackers exploited Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities to get into companies' mail servers and implemented backdoors to control the devices of the company and its subsidiaries. China has said in recent years that the U.S. has stepped up its U.S. cyber attacks. We'll see about that. Again, this is all coming from the China Daily, which is essentially a CCP-aligned propaganda news source in China. And the reason they're actually doing this in China now is because they know that Trump's coming in, tariffs are on the way. There is going to be some heating up in the China-US relations and US-China relations, specifically around cyber attacks, trade, and so forth. And by the way, Trump's going to come in and salt Typhoon. We're actually going to get behind the telco breach, likely within the first, I'd say, 2 or 3 weeks of his presidency. So they're just trying to influence their people into understanding that it's when they accuse us, we're not the only ones doing it. They're also doing it, and they're just trying to build support for what's about to come to China on behalf of the Trump administration as they really do change their policies. And the new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has spoken extensively around holding China accountable for everything going on. And obviously, he heads the Senate Intelligence Committee with Senator Mark Warner. So Senator Rubio, a very, very staunch Secretary of State who will likely get confirmed very quickly and will be leading the State Department way better than the current guy sitting in there now. We'll move to some ICS news. Rockwell Automation, in its Allen Bradley Power Monitor 1000 product, is saying they have a critical vulnerability that would allow remote attackers to breach an organization's industrial systems and cause disruptions or gain further access. The existence of the vulnerabilities came to light when Rockwell Automation and CISA released Security Advisory Power Monitor 1000 as a compact power monitor for load profiling, cost allocation, and energy control. The device can be integrated with other energy monitoring systems. It can easily communicate with other Rockwell industrial control systems. 3 types of vulnerabilities were discovered there. Each of them has been assigned a critical severity. One of them, CVE 2024-12371, has been described as a device takeover issue. Just to understand from that, from an Allen Bradley Power Monitor, you can't really shut off the power, but you can really do a lot of damage. The second flaw is a denial of service attack. That's CVE 2024-12372. And the third is an exploit, can be exploited for denial of service attacks as well. That's 12373 as well. So these devices are running versions of firmware prior to 4.0.20, which contains patches. Team researchers at Team 82 of Clarity have been credited for responsibly disclosing the vulnerabilities to Rockwell. And by the way, Rockwell writes part of their source code in China. So there's that. Siemens, for their end, issued a security advisory for a critical vulnerability that affects their ICS systems in its user management component, or UMC. It could enable attackers to execute arbitrary code. It's a heap-based buffer overflow flaw that impacts products used in manufacturing and energy. It's tracked as CVE 2024-49775. UMC is a central component in the Siemens Industrial Automation Suite. It enables system-wide user management and affects products including Op Center, Execution Foundation, Op Center Intelligence, Semantic PCS Neo, SYNAC NMC, and Totally Integrated Automation Portal. Those systems play a pivotal role in managing distributed control systems, network monitoring, and automation. CISA said the agencies that these products are widely deployed across the globe. Also true. Siemens recommends part of the fixes is restricting access to UMC-related ports 4002 and 4004 to trusted IP addresses, and blocking port 4004 entirely if real-time servers are unnecessary. CISA reinforced those recommendations, urging organizations to conduct impact analysis and deploy defensive measures as of there. A Microsoft 365 phishing-as-a-service platform called Flaw Storm is growing in popularity, filling a void by the shutdown of Rockstar 2FA cybercrime service. So this was documented by TrustWave back in November of 2024. The service offered advanced evasion mechanisms, a user-friendly panel, and numerous phishing options, selling to cybercriminals for just $200 for 2 weeks. According to Sophos researchers, Rockstar 2FA suffered from a partial infrastructure collapse that brought it down, and now this is likely a rebrand of it. And it's gaining a whole lot of popularity. So you can obviously see more of that there. And finally, the U.S. Department of Justice has charged a Russian-Israeli dual national for his suspected role in developing malware and managing the infrastructure for the LockBit ransomware group. According to the criminal complaint that was unsealed in the District Court of New Jersey, Rostilov Panev, 51, a dual Russian and Israeli national, allegedly helped develop LockBit's ransomware encryptors and custom SteelBit data theft tool commonly used in the attack. He was arrested in Israel in August, where he's awaiting extradition to the United States. Israeli news site Ynet first reported the arrest. The criminal complaint alleges that Israeli law enforcement found credentials on his computer to online repositories containing the source code for the LockBit encryptors and SteelBit tool. As alleged in the superseding complaint, at the time of his arrest in Israel, law enforcement discovered on his computer administrator credentials for online repositories that were hosted on the dark web and stored source code for multiple versions of the LockBit builder, which allowed LockBit's affiliates to generate custom builds of the LockBit ransomware malware for particular victims. On that repository, law enforcement also discovered source code for LockBit's SteelBit tool, which helped LockBit affiliates exfiltrate data stolen through LockBit attacks. Law enforcement also discovered access credentials for the control panel, an online dashboard maintained by developers for affiliates and hosted by these developers online. The repositories also contained the source code for Conti encryptors, which was leaked by Ukrainian researchers after Conti sided with Russia. The source code is believed to have been used to create the LockBit Green encryptor, which was based off the Conti encryptor. The complaint also says that Panav used a hacking forum private message feature to communicate with primary LockBit operator. Now that's Dmitry Yurovich Koreshev. Their messages were to discuss work that needed to be coded in the LockBit builder. For his work, Panav allegedly earned approximately $230,000 over 18 months. He could have made that money working in a high-tech industry in Israel without having to go to jail for it. So there's that. He is now going to get extradited to the U.S., where he will be treated to very nice meals in a U.S. penitentiary while he pays for his crimes, which will obviously cost a lot more than what he made from cybercrime. So there's that for it. There's that for this guy. That's it for him. All right. That's it for our show this morning. We'll be back tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern, live with all the latest and greatest as we wrap up Christmas Eve. So tomorrow, very, light show. I hope nothing crazy happens between today and tomorrow. And then we'll be off on Wednesday for Christmas Day and the first night of Hanukkah. And we'll be back Thursday with another show to wrap up the week. So stay tuned for that. Until then, have a great rest of your day, y'all. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if I don't speak to you tomorrow, if you don't, for whatever reason, you don't tune in, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. I hope you enjoy your holiday and time away. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. And most importantly, y'all, stay cyber.
We love feedback, so make sure to connect with us on social media and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform.